Hi, this is Kevin Makes Cool Things. I'm Kevin, and the cool thing I made today is this wand. This project started because of my girlfriend. Everyone at her job dresses up for Halloween, and this year she decided to go as a Hogwarts student. She asked me for something she could use as a wand. I was just going to give her a bit of dowel, but decided to go for something more elaborate. She took the official quiz online, and it determined that her wand was 14.5 inches in length, made of dogwood wood with a unicorn hair core. This one is made of ABS plastic and acrylic paint, but I did base it on the image from the test, and I used the length. The first step is figuring out the dimensions. I started by finding a clean version of the wand I was going to make. The graphics in the quiz were very nice, but I want something with a white or transparent background to work off of. Next, I named the different pieces. I used terminology you'd normally use for a sword because, at least in this case, it made more sense than calling them parts A, B, C, etc. This made it much easier to take notes about the different pieces and sped up the design process. Next, I found the rough measurements. Using the image I'd found, I measured the size of each piece in pixels, then divided by the total length of the wand in pixels. This gave me the length of each piece as a percentage of the wand's total length. Then I multiplied each percentage by the total length of the wand in inches, which is 14.5 for this wand, to get the total length of each piece in inches. I still needed to figure out the diameter of the wand, especially the grip. I didn't want to make something that looks good but feels uncomfortable in your hand. To play with different thicknesses for the grip, I did a simple test. I took an empty toilet paper tube and cut it down its length. I folded it up a little to make it easier to work with, then rolled it up to play with different thicknesses. Eventually I settled on 2 centimeters, so a little less than an inch, and added a bit of tape to keep it from moving. Before finalizing the design, I did a sanity check. The artist did their job and created a great looking image, but that doesn't mean the dimensions will work in reality. I was worried the grip was going to be too short, so I performed a simple test. I took the mock-up I made when I was playing around with different diameters for the grip, and used it to test out different lengths. The rough dimensions had the length of the grip as around 3 1/8 inches, which turned out to be passable. I decided the grip would be more comfortable if it was a bit longer, so I extended it to 10 centimeters, which is the length of the roll. Turns out it would have been fine in this case, but I'm really glad I checked. If the wand was 10 inches, which is a possible length, the grip would only have been 2 1/8 inches. If you have large hands like I do, that is comically small. I went back and adjusted my measurements. This was to accommodate the enlarged handle, and round some of the numbers so they were easier to work with. Now I was ready to move on to making the model. I strayed slightly from the original image. The image shows the wand as having these nice, subtle curves. I dramatized these curves a bit because it looked far better. It's not exactly like the image, but I think it's true to the spirit of the design. This is the finished model. I made it using OpenSCAD, which is free. I'm not going to go into detail about how I made it because it won't make much sense unless you have a background in programming. The really short explanation is that I utilized a for loop with a bunch of if statements and used a sine function to get the nice curves. If people are really interested and post in the comments, maybe I'll make another video going more in depth. One part of the model, which isn't really visible, is a channel running down the center. As you'll see later, this was very helpful. I printed the model in 3 pieces. I started by using a knife to shave off the larger imperfections, and then started sanding. I probably sanded for about a half hour between a few sessions. I used 100 grit sandpaper because it was all I had lying around. It created a fair amount of dust, so I'm glad I was wearing a mask. After each sanding session, I wiped down the prints with a damp paper towel to get the remaining dust off. When I was done sanding, the pieces were pretty smooth. They weren't perfect, but I knew the paint would cover the imperfections. The most problematic part was on the guard, where the curve of the wand made sanding especially difficult. It ended up being fine, but next time I do a print I'm going to put more thought into how I'll sand it. Connecting the pieces was easy. I put a paperclip into the channel running down the center of the wand to center the pieces. I got them rotated just so, and then used a pencil to create a mark on both pieces. Then I just applied a bit of super glue, lined up the marks, and that was it. I applied 5 to 6 coats of white acrylic paint as a base. This covered the imperfections from sanding and the joins where I'd glued the pieces together. The channel running through the wand really helped me again. I improvised a drying stand using a paperclip, which reduced the mess and sped up the process. The most embarrassing part of this whole thing was attempting to mix brown paint. I tried mixing the primary colors a couple of times and got dark purple each time. I didn't want to waste paint, so I applied it to the wand as extra base coats. I eventually admitted defeat and went out to get brown paint. I applied 2 coats to the wand, and this is what it ended up looking like. Before doing this, I used a little scrap of paper to plug the channel in the pommel, which I had been using for the drying rack, and painted over it. I mixed some dark brown paint and started on the details. I used a small dry brush with a very small amount of paint to add dark streaks down the length of the wand. Whenever I applied too much dark paint, I smudged it off with my finger, which actually looked pretty good. The wand is supposed to have some cordage wrapped around the pommel. I used a small brush to apply dark paint to the raised areas. I'm not the best painter, so I had to go back afterwards with some normal brown paint to clean it up. I finished it off by using a small brush with a small amount of black paint to add some diagonal lines to the cordage. And that's how I made this wand. I had a great time making it, and I'm really pleased with how it turned out. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, consider liking, subscribing, or leaving a comment.